Our second reading today is the ending of the Noah story. It tells of the covenant God makes after the great flood ends. And you can see on the front of our bulletin and in real life, our church window that tells the story with the rainbow at the top being the symbol of this covenant right over there. A reading from the book of Genesis. Listen now for the word. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and every animal of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I will make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember." God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. When we take communion today, we will hear Jesus' words, "This cup is the new covenant sealed in my blood." And in churches everywhere, when people are baptized, we hear those beautiful words, "Child of the covenant, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." Our dictionaries can tell us that a covenant is a formal, binding agreement or promise. But what does covenant really mean in the history of our faith, and what does it mean to follow a covenantal God today? Our window restoration process has begun, and I've spent more time in here staring up at these works of art, answering children's questions about these works of art. And I invite you all to do that sometime that you need a quiet place to pray. Come sit in this beautiful place. Many of you may remember that 6 years ago, I believe, Pastors Emily and Ted gave a sermon series on these windows. And they're called the covenantal windows because they depict stories of God's promises made and fulfilled, and they call us to live boldly and faithfully into God's promised future. I'll not be doing a full sermon series on every window, but inspired by the covenantal windows, as David said, I will be preaching about God's covenants for the next 4 weeks, starting with the rainbow covenant. The beauty of our windows has reminded me that especially now, my soul is hungry to remember what God has promised. And I wonder if yours is too. To get at the deeper meaning of the rainbow covenant, it is helpful to try to understand what the ancient tellers of this story were up to. Now, long before the story we know was written down, Noah's Ark was probably told and retold orally, changing as memories changed, growing as new experiences and questions were incorporated. It's unlikely that the earliest tellers of this story saw themselves as giving a historical account. The Bible is filled with texts of all genres, and I agree with the scholars who say the most accurate genre label for this one is myth. Now, ancient myths may not have been historical accounts, but neither were they fake, meaningless, silly stories. Myths were central to ancient people's identity and understanding of the world. It's helpful to think of ancient myths as stories by which people tried to grasp and express truths too deep for words. In other words, A story can be a myth and still deeply true. In the end, our understanding of this story as a myth actually increases its significance and meaning. Here's why. One of the reasons we understand Noah's Ark to be a myth and not a historical account is that flood narratives like this one were widespread in the ancient world, and especially in the geographic area of the Hebrew people. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a hero warned by God that a flood is coming, who builds a boat, and after the flood ends, sends out birds to look for land. That sounds familiar. In the Babylonian epic of Atrahasis, there is also a god so annoyed by how loud earth has gotten that he sends a flood to wipe out all the noise. So clearly, catastrophic floods were a reality for these ancient people. And clearly, the crafters of the Noah's Ark story were using common themes and tropes to make a point. So what was their point? In all of these ancient flood stories, we see people wrestling with questions we still wrestle with today. Having experienced catastrophic natural disasters, they wondered, how and why can God allow this? And why do some people live and others die? Now, the beginning and middle of our Noah story roughly follows the same general arc as its Mesopotamian and Babylonian counterparts. It's the end of the Noah story that makes a distinct turn and takes a unique stand. Through God's gracious self-disclosure to the Hebrew people, they came to believe that God said, "Never again." That God made a covenant with all flesh, a promise not just to one people or one race or one species, but all flesh, people of every generation, every nation, even the animals, a covenant with the whole world. I, your God, will never destroy you. These myths may have similar beginnings and middles, but to my knowledge, none share that ending, a covenant with all creation. How amazing it is that in an ancient world filled with stories about violent, warring gods, the Hebrew people tell about a God who symbolically surrenders his weapon. That's the symbolism behind the rainbow. I place my bow in the sky is God saying, I surrender my weapon. No longer is this a symbol of violence, it is now a symbol of a promise to protect. So, recognizing that this story is a myth increases its power for us because it helps us see that the Hebrew people were moved by God to make a very distinct claim. In this covenant, we see the seeds of a claim about God's relationship with creation that grows in clarity and strength until thousands of years later, the Gospel of John came to say it like this: "For God so loved the world." Modern Christians too often discount the Noah story as a cute children's story, or reject it for describing a God cruel enough to send the flood in the first place, or try to force it into a modern genre of historical record. But all of those approaches seem to miss the true power. When we see this story in conversation with other stories, we see how the ending, the covenant, is the whole point. Flood myths tell about violent, vengeful gods, but this covenant proclaims a God of mercy and protection who lays down his weapon. Flood myths tell about a central hero, favored, spared from disaster. But this covenant says God's mercy is for all people and every creature. There are no special favorites here. Flood myths tell about a God of unlimited, unpredictable power. But this covenant tells about a God who places limits on himself and his own power so others can flourish. The Hebrew people's theological grappling and encounters with God led them to see a God who did not fit the tropes of the surrounding myths. And the Rainbow Covenant is their declaration about who God truly is. So, what do we need to hear in this story today? First, we need to hear that the first promise people heard God make in our faith tradition was a promise made to all creation. Over time in the Old Testament, we'll see God's promises get more complicated. They begin to involve a particular family, a particular nation, a particular king. But this first promise, heard thousands of years ago by spiritually sensitive people, is a promise to all flesh. And that's crucial for framing every other promise to come. If the promise with Noah reveals God's compassion and love for the whole world, then we should see every future promise as a part of a plan that serves God's compassion and love for the whole world. We need to remember that today. As we celebrate 250 years of a nation born out of the belief that all people are created equal, we have to remember we are celebrating a belief that extends our moral obligation far beyond the boundaries of our nation. If we celebrate that all people are made equal by God, then we cannot celebrate America without praying for Gaza and Sudan and Afghanistan, to name just a few places. If Christians everywhere took seriously the power of God's rainbow covenant, then we would all agree that there is no place in Christianity for racism or American exceptionalism, abuse of creation, or abuse of the poor. The second thing we need to hear in this covenant today is that it is unconditional, meaning God made a promise to us that required nothing from us. We have no side of the promise to uphold. God did not say, if you are good, if you are faithful, I won't destroy you. God said, no matter what, no matter who you are or what you do, this is who I am. An unconditional promise. And I can't help but wonder if we've lost sight of or hope in that kind of promise today. Don't we tend to live conditionally? I know it's tempting for me. If they treat me well, I'll treat them well. If they support me, I'll support them. If they believe what I believe, I can get along with them. But God's unconditional promise reminds us that there's a different, better way to live. When we stand up for who we are, when we know we will be no matter what happens to us, no matter what our enemies do to us, when we know we are going to be compassionate and gentle and merciful to all. The Rainbow Covenant tells us that kind of love changes the world. That kindness, no matter what, is not being a pushover. It's a courageous choice. And when we make it, we join God in the Rainbow Covenant. Finally, this story asks us to ask ourselves, are we allowing our encounters with God to change and challenge the dominant cultural narratives being told today? The Hebrew people were seeking truth. And when they encountered a truth, like God's compassion for all creation, that challenged surrounding myths, they knew they had to change the narrative. So what dominant cultural stories are we allowing to shape our understanding of God rather than the other way around? When enough people say America's interests are the most important thing, will we let go of God's promise to every people of every nation? When enough people say they don't want their hard-earned money going to the poor, will we stop reading all the biblical passages that demand our care for the poor? When enough people demonize followers of other faiths, will we forget the story of the Good Samaritan? No, it must be the other way around. God's promise to all of creation should make us wary of American exceptionalism, God's demand to help the poor should make us suspicious of every story that tells us the poor are not our problem. Jesus' story of the Good Samaritan should make us ready to encounter God's presence among followers of other faiths. The Rainbow Covenant challenged the stories being told about a vengeful, violent God. So too must our theological questioning and our encounters with God give us strength to stand up to misguided cultural narratives today. Above all, as we consider this story, may this be our prayer, that every time we and future generations are blessed to gather in this beautiful place, may the window depicting Noah inspire us to remember with hope God's rainbow covenant and to ask with courage, what does it mean for us to walk in the light of this promise today? By God's grace and power, may it be so. Amen.